Welcome to the Authority File, the academic library podcast from Choice, brought to you this week by Sage Publishing and Choice. I'm Bill Mickey, the host of the podcast and the editorial director here at Choice, and this week I'm joined by Michael Carmichael, senior publisher for video at Sage Publishing, and Jeffrey Karpicki, a James V. Bradley professor of psychological sciences at Purdue University. Michael and Jeffrey have a fascinating tale to tell about how they came together to conduct a literature review and original research around using video in an educational context. Sage has been publishing video content for the last 3 years, and as the company committed further to the format, it wanted to learn more about how video is having a demonstrable impact on education and learning. But in order to do that, Michael knew that he and his team needed external expertise to understand some of the deeper research around the topic, which led them to Jeffrey, who is a cognitive scientist researching learning strategies. What Michael and Jeffrey found out ended up in a recently published white paper called Assessing the Impact of Educational Video on Student Engagement, Critical Thinking, and Learning, the Current State of Play, which is available now from Sage. In this final episode of our series, I speak with our two guests about new opportunities that lay ahead for further discovery about how students and faculty can get the most out of video content. Okay, so one of the, downsides, I don't want to be too dramatic over this, but one of the downsides that was identified in the white paper is that while video does provide more freedom to learn, there's, a possibility there that that freedom can result in some isolated learning and increased reliance on self-discipline from the student perspective in the absence of an instructor. Is this concerning to you, or is there a balance that can be achieved here in terms of, acknowledging that potential exists, but also there might be another side to that can kind of achieve a more positive outcome, I guess.
Yeah, I think you speak well of the sort of the balance or the tension that exists there. The changing market, as we've talked about, provides enormous benefits to students to take more control and charge over their learning experience and their voyage through university. Or returning students and so forth through the multiple ways in which we can engage in higher education. And video can, I think lends itself well there, but can bring people closer together, can allow broader participation, video and not just video, other multimedia sources actually, I think, brings kind of different groups into higher education that potentially for socioeconomic means or otherwise might not have been able to be part of higher education up until that point. And so the research is showing that video and multimedia resources more widely is certainly, I think, playing a role in widening the pool, which is a great thing. I think it's fantastic for education and eventually our economies. But I think, that there are tensions. I think, certainly it's not a perfect world. There are challenges around technology and access in certain quarters, and that there's sort of, streaming video it requires bandwidth and requires kind of the right kind of internet setup and infrastructure. And then there are, other issues that we hear about in the research around, as you mentioned, Bill, this sort of idea of isolationism.
Yeah.
And, self-regulation is just much harder to do without some form of kind of guidance, as it were, or mentorship. So I think it certainly presents, I think, a challenge, but there are opportunities at the same time.
Yeah, Jeff, I'd be interested to hear your perspective on this, coming from sort of that psychological background.
Yeah. Wow. It is definitely a challenge, because I resonate with everything that Michael just said, because on the one hand, presenting content in video format, I guess you could think of this as the promise of MOOCs, or massive open online courses, is that then you're getting things out there that in the past were just happening behind closed doors, but now are accessible to millions of people. And some of those people just don't have the means to have access to that kind of content or that information or those materials. And so that's the massive upside to I think what we're all talking about right now.
Yeah.
But in a purely online only kind of and video based largely learning environment, that is a challenge because there isn't the same kind of accountability, I would call it, that there is when, for instance, in my course at Purdue University, I've got about 30 students and I know who they are and they are coming and we are all physically in the classroom together. And so there's a different dynamic in terms of they have a teacher who they're meeting with face to face and interacting with a few times a week, and who knows them and who is holding them to kind of do their homework and come to class prepared and so on. And that's not the same. That dynamic isn't there in the same way when you're in a purely online video-based kind of format. I think instructors can find creative ways to make this not so much of a downside. And I think that in hybrid courses where there is video content outside class, but interactive stuff happening in the classroom, instructors can also do things to try to help keep students feeling accountable for their own learning. But I think that's a big open question right now, just in general about videos and online learning in particular.
Sage Publishing has just released a new video collection on the Sage Research Methods platform called Practical Research and Academic Skills. These 400 video titles cover the practical skills needed to conduct successful research, including project and time management, writing for publication, and presenting work. There is also an essay writing kit appropriate for anyone learning to write college-level papers, and information on pursuing careers in research. Students looking to continue in academia will find information on building professional networks and presenting at conferences. These tips are presented through engaging videos, which include tutorials and animated videos. Go to sagepub.com to learn more and to find information on free trials. Yeah, I mean, Jeff, you mentioned MOOCs, and in the white paper, there's some comments there around the idea that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that the MOOC industry is challenging institutional certainties, which has led to a nervousness around these developments and change. And in short, a reluctance to relinquish control and a tension between commercial and academic approaches exists. And Mike, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that tension is between academic and commercial, and why it's there.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we talked earlier about the sort of the advent of some of these course mechanisms, flipped classroom, blended learning, really at the top of the decade, and MOOC, the MOOC revolution, massive open online courses, really sort of fitted within that. Really started, I think, at the top of this last decade, and had an incredible, it had a profound rise. Very, very quickly. I think in the United States, the amount of MOOCs doubled in size between 2012 to 2013 alone, and sort of just had this exponential increase.
Right.
And I think not just because of the increase, but also because of the mechanism, as Jeff has mentioned. There are tensions that sort of were created. I think there are tensions that are in existence there really. And so I think the institutional certainties, or now uncertainties, I think, are really around, what are the deterrents and the upsides to universities of MOOCs. And, there are upsides and, there are downsides, like with many things. I think from the upside point of view, I think MOOCs offer, enormous opportunities for universities to strengthen and elevate their brand, both nationally and internationally. And we've seen that. And there are some phenomenally well participated and well branded MOOCs out there across many academic subjects. There are financial rewards. There's opportunity for income stream. There are, as we've talked about here in this podcast, I think there are opportunities within this for universities to then experiment and then innovate and think about how they might deliver their course requirements differently. So we've seen how, it starts with a MOOC, but then the aspect of MOOC delivery comes into the classroom, as Jeff was saying, and you're seeing the sort of the learning of that being applied within the framework of the university itself. But, then on the other side, there are deterrents and there are sort of downsides too. So I think there is a sense of an uncertainty about whether we're seeing, really good student outcomes through these courses. And I don't know how, well that's really been tested, but there's certainly that seems to be a perception. What is true is that they are very demanding on time and resourcing within universities. And there is a feeling, I think that's where attention comes from. If you're an academic and you're contracted to that university, how much time should you be spending on teaching your students versus, 1.5 million intro psych students outside in the wider world.
Yeah.
And so that is a very obvious tension, and clearly for leaders of educational establishments, that kind of creates some unease, I think, about what time their professors are spending, on their students and otherwise. And then there is some research or some sites which talk about potentially the increase of plagiarism in student behaviour through the advent of MOOCs. And I think I don't know how well tested that is, but I don't know if Jeff, you know more about that. But they seem to be something that seems to be prevalent, and I don't know if it's more around specifically MOOCs or sort of different modes of course delivery, but certainly there's some unease that goes with all of those positive benefits.
Right. One thing I did want to ask Michael is Jeff had raised the point of, as we were talking about sort of the potential of isolated learning that video might create, that professors can be a little bit more creative in sort of their approach to integrating video into their instruction. I'm wondering, Michael, does Sage offer any sort of supporting material or literature in terms of how to incorporate your video products into a learning environment?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we've got lots of documentation on use cases for for video. We've developed these instructor guides for every subject. We've launched a collection where we've actually had faculty members write those, in fact, and say, I use a lot of video in my teaching, and I would use these videos in this way and to drive assessment. And we have guidelines on how to embed video into various different learning management systems. It's a world, I think, that is, if you're multimedia savvy, you'll probably these things, you'll feel your way through more readily, but perhaps, for some, that's not the case. And so we're trying to, and video platforms are different with different tools and features, and we're doing all we can to sort of say, these are the benefits of using not just video, but our video and our platform.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so looking forward, Jeff, Michael, any plans to collaborate on anything further, or any ideas what those subjects might be?
Definitely.
Yes, definitely.
Jeff, where would you like to see things go?
Well, I have. Part of the reason I got interested in this in the first place was because my lab completely independently of Michael and Sage, my lab had started doing some research on videos and the kinds of effects of videos on students' metacognition, their metacognitive judgments. And we weren't asking the specific questions that we addressed in the experiment that's in the white paper, and that experiment has led to a number of additional research questions that I think that Michael and I will end up tackling. There's one in particular, or maybe two in particular, that I thought I could mention. One is that we weren't able to tell in our experiment whether different types of graphics have different effects on engagement or learning, because we just had one group that had some graphics and another condition that didn't have the graphics. So in order to know what types of graphics matter, you need to do a different type of experiment where you're directly comparing different types of graphics in a kind of pure controlled way. And I'd love to do that because that would be really interesting and I think informative. And then the second bit is I don't think even in the large literature I mentioned earlier on multimedia learning, even in that literature, I don't think there's a whole lot about students' metacognition, about the kinds of beliefs and self-assessments that students make when they are watching videos. I'm not sure those have really been explored much at all in terms of multimedia and videos, and that could be really an interesting new avenue, because how students perceive their learning is just as important, maybe even more important than their actual learning outcomes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, I mean, I totally echo Jeff's desires to dig more into graphics and the specific nature of graphics. I mean, coming back to trying to understand where we should, invest in our time and resourcing, custom animations, take a good amount of time and resource to create, and they take more than, taking stock images and sort of putting them into video at different spaces and points. And so really what we want to know is kind of like, well, can we get closer to understanding, we sense that diversity is always, is great, but can we get closer to understanding whether certain types really make a difference and where we should to invest more? I think other things that are really interesting to look at are, so there's this, just the whole idea of kind of video and student assessment. Like how effective we talked about assignable video earlier, and just how video is being kind of clipped and used and assigned to help teach kind of concepts in the classroom. What about actually using video for assessment? Kind of the idea of having multimedia clips as part of your multiple choice exercise in your exam. Are there both trends in that direction, and indeed are there good outcomes within that? And then generally around assessment. I mean, assessment is a big one and quite a loaded term, and whether video can make a real difference in lots of different areas of assessment. So some studies show that, exam performance is great, but that's been looked at in, maybe in molecular biology. So are there sort of universal ideas of how and where video is contributing to the idea of assessment? So those, I think those would be, those are great ways for us to continue to collaborate. But there's a huge amount more for us to look at. I mean, I think this white paper's just excited me no end into thinking around the kind of research that could be undertaken at this point.
Right. Excellent. Yeah, it sounds like this was a really productive partnership for both of you, and still lots to do. So I want to thank you both for your time with speaking with us, and hope to maybe we'll be able to circle back on the subject when you do some more research on it.
That would be great.
Love to. Yeah, we'd love to do that.
All right. Well, it's great talking with you both, and thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You just heard from Michael Carmichael, Senior Publisher for Video at Sage Publishing, and Jeffrey Karpicki, a James V. Bradley Professor of Psychological Sciences at Purdue University, who examined how video can be most successfully used as an instruction and research tool, which resulted in a white paper called Assessing the Impact of Educational Video on Student Engagement, Critical Thinking, and Learning, the Current State of Play. This concludes the final episode of our 4-part series brought to you by Sage Publishing and Choice. You can search for and listen to all of the episodes of The Authority File on your favorite podcast platform. You can also find all of our episodes on choice360.org. Just click on the librarianship dropdown. Be sure to leave us a rating and review. That's all for this series. As always, thank you for joining us.